Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
As I sit down to write this, I'm still trying to process the shock and disappointment I felt when I received an email from our HOA board a few days ago. The contents of that message have left me reeling, and I'm struggling to comprehend the nerve of the people behind it. My husband and I thought we had stumbled upon the perfect place to call home when we purchased our house in August 2020. We were thrilled to have snagged it at an incredible price, and we felt like we were on cloud nine. As the youngest residents in our neighborhood and first-time homebuyers, we were excited to be part of a community that seemed to have friendly neighbors and a relaxed atmosphere. My husband was 27, and I was 25 at the time, and we thought we had found a great fit. Fast forward 4 years and everything has changed. We've had a new HOA board take over, and let me tell you, they are on a power trip like no other. It's like they're trying to make our lives miserable. We've always paid our dues on time, and we've never had any issues with the HOA before. But now, it seems like they're just looking for ways to nickel and dime us. The first sign of trouble came about 3 weeks ago when we received not one, not two, but 3 violations from the HOA. One was for not mulching our yard. One was for having our trash cans visible from the street, and one was for not pressure washing our driveway. The violations were dated for April 17th, but we didn't receive them until April 24th, giving us a whopping 10 days to fix each issue. The problem was we had already scheduled landscaping work to be done, and we had told the HOA that we would mulch our yard after the work was completed. They had approved our plan, but somehow they still managed to send us a violation notice. The trash can issue was even more ridiculous. We had gone out of town for 10 days, and our neighbors had kindly agreed to take our trash cans down for us so our garage wouldn't smell. We left them in front of our house, and the HOA had a problem with that. I emailed them back, explaining the situation and asking which they preferred, us leaving the cans at the curb for 10 days or putting them in front of our house. I also attached screenshots of our approved landscaping plan, highlighting the fact that they had given us permission to mulch our yard after the work was completed. I asked them why they were trying to fine us for something they had already approved. I thought that was the end of it, but boy was I wrong. Yesterday, I received an email from the HOA at 10 p.m. with a picture of our trash cans on the curb from that morning. The email said that our trash cans couldn't be out on the curb on non-trash collection days. Are you kidding me? Tuesday is the day our trash gets picked up, and we put our bins out the night before to make sure they get emptied. It's not like we're leaving them out there for weeks on end. I was furious. I immediately hopped on our HOA Facebook page and called out the entire board. I wanted to know why they were targeting us and why they were being so ridiculous. That's when I found out that I wasn't the only one who had received a citation for having their trash cans out on the curb. It seemed like everyone with the same trash service had gotten a notice. I couldn't believe it. Were they seriously trying to fine us for following the rules? I'm still trying to wrap my head around the whole situation. It's like the HOA board is trying to make our lives difficult. They're not even trying to hide it. They're just sending out random violations, hoping to catch people off guard. It's like they're on some kind of power trip, and they're not going to stop until they've sucked every last penny out of us. I'm so frustrated. I feel like we're being bullied by our own HOA. We're not trying to break any rules or cause any trouble. We just want to live in our house and enjoy our community. But it seems like the HOA board is determined to make that impossible. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I'm not going to take this lying down. I'm going to fight every single one of these violations, and I'm going to make sure that the HOA board knows that they can't push us around. We're not going to be intimidated by their threats and their fines. We're going to stand up for ourselves and for our community. It's time for the HOA board to realize that they're not above the law, and they're not above accountability. The situation has escalated since then. Just a few days after the trash can incident, we got another email from the HOA. This time, they were complaining about the color of our front door. Apparently, the shade of blue we had painted it wasn't in harmony with the community aesthetic. This was news to us because we had picked the color from the approved palette provided by the HOA when we first moved in. I sent them another email with the original documents and the color swatch attached, asking for an explanation. No response. Instead, we received a formal letter threatening to fine us if we didn't repaint the door within 14 days. By now I was livid. The audacity of these people. My husband and I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to confront the board in person. When we arrived, it was clear that we weren't the only ones unhappy with the new regime. The room was packed with disgruntled homeowners, all with similar stories of arbitrary violations and unresponsive board members. When it was our turn to speak, I laid out our case, complete with emails, photos, and documents. The board members just sat there, stone-faced, and then proceeded to tell us that they would take our concerns under advisement. It felt like we were talking to a brick wall. The president of the HOA, a woman named Karen, of course, seemed particularly uninterested in resolving any of the issues. She kept repeating that they were just enforcing the rules for the good of the community. I pointed out that the rules seemed to change based on their whims, and that this new level of scrutiny was driving everyone crazy. Karen just smirked and moved on to the next agenda item. A few days later, we received another letter. This time, it was about our backyard fence. They claimed it was too high and didn't comply with the HOA regulations. Never mind that the fence had been there since we bought the house and had passed inspection multiple times. They gave us 30 days to lower the fence or face daily fines. At this point, my husband and I were seriously considering getting a lawyer involved. It was clear that the HOA was not interested in fair enforcement of the rules, but rather in making an example out of us. Maybe because we were young, maybe because we were new, or maybe just because they could. We spent the next weekend documenting everything. Every email, every letter, every photo. We even talked to our neighbors and gathered statements from them about their own experiences with the HOA. It was reassuring to know we weren't alone, but it was also disheartening to see how many people were affected by this nonsense. In the midst of all this, we received yet another violation notice. This time, it was about the height of our grass. They claimed it was over the maximum allowable height and demanded we mow it within 48 hours. This was the last straw for me. We had just mowed the lawn the previous weekend, and it was nowhere near overgrown. I took a ruler out to the yard, measured the grass, and took photos with timestamps. It was well within the acceptable range. I emailed the board with the photos and asked for a retraction of the violation. Their response: another form letter stating that they would review our case and get back to us within 30 days. It was like they were trying to drown us in bureaucracy. Meanwhile, the tension in our neighborhood was palpable. We started hearing about more and more people getting violation notices for the most absurd things. A garden gnome that was too whimsical. A car parked slightly askew in a driveway. Holiday decorations left up one day too long. It was like living in some twisted version of a suburban dystopia. One evening, I was chatting with our next-door neighbor, Sarah, who had also been targeted by the HOA. She suggested we start a petition to remove the current board. It seemed like a long shot, but at this point, we were willing to try anything. We spent the next few weeks going door to door, talking to our neighbors, and gathering signatures. Most people were more than happy to sign once they heard what we were doing. We managed to get a significant number of signatures and submitted the petition to the HOA. Their response? They claimed that some of the signatures were invalid, and that we hadn't met the necessary threshold. They provided no evidence for their claims and refused to disclose the exact number of signatures required. It was another dead end. Around this time, my husband and I started noticing strange things happening around our house. One morning, we found our mailbox knocked over. Another time, our garden hose had been slashed. We couldn't prove it was related to the HOA issues, but it felt too coincidental to be random vandalism. It was like someone was trying to intimidate us into backing down. We installed security cameras around our property, hoping to catch whoever was behind the vandalism. The cameras did catch some footage of suspicious activity, but nothing clear enough to identify anyone. It was frustrating and made us feel even more paranoid. To make matters worse, my husband's car was towed from our driveway one night. The HOA claimed it was parked in a manner that violated the community's regulations, even though it had been in the same spot for months without issue. Getting the car back was a nightmare, and we had to pay a hefty fee to the towing company. It was like they were trying to bleed us dry with these petty fines and fees. The stress was starting to take a toll on our relationship. My husband and I were constantly on edge, snapping at each other over the smallest things. It felt like we were living in a war zone with the HOA as our relentless enemy. We barely had time to enjoy our home anymore because we were always dealing with some new crisis or violation. In the midst of all this chaos, we learned that the HOA was planning to increase the annual dues. They cited increased operational costs and the need for community improvements as the reasons. This was the final insult. They were making our lives miserable, and then expecting us to pay even more for the privilege. We attended the meeting where the dues increase was to be voted on, hoping to at least voice our opposition. The room was packed and tensions were high. As the discussion dragged on, it became clear that the board had already made up their minds. They weren't interested in hearing from the residents, they were just going through the motions. When it was our turn to speak, I laid out all the issues we had been facing and questioned why we should pay more when the HOA was doing such a terrible job. Karen, the board president, dismissed my concerns with a condescending smile and a patronizing remark about how change is always difficult. The dues increase passed, of course. It felt like a slap in the face. We had fought so hard and gotten nowhere. It was like the HOA had all the power, and we were just helpless pawns in their game. As the months went on, the violations kept coming. We got notices for things that were completely out of our control, like leaves falling from a tree onto our driveway or a bird nesting in our eaves. It was absurd. We tried to keep up with everything, but it was exhausting and expensive. One particularly infuriating incident involved a Halloween decoration. We had put up a few tasteful decorations, nothing too over the top, just some pumpkins and a few spider webs. The next day, we received a violation notice stating that our decorations were inappropriate and offensive. Offensive to whom? We had no idea. It seemed like the HOA was just inventing reasons to fine us at this point. I decided to take a different approach and reached out to a local news station. I thought that maybe if we got some media attention, the HOA would back off. The news crew came out, interviewed us, and did a segment on the ridiculous HOA enforcement. The response from the community was overwhelmingly supportive, but it also seemed to enrage the HOA even more. After the news segment aired, we started receiving violations almost daily. It was clear that the board was retaliating. Our mailbox was filled with letters demanding compliance with increasingly obscure and nonsensical rules. It was a nightmare. At one point, we decided to consult with a lawyer to see if there was any legal recourse. The lawyer was sympathetic, but explained that fighting an HOA in court could be a long and expensive process with no guarantee of success. It felt like we were trapped. Our neighbors continued to rally around us, but it was little comfort in the face of the relentless harassment from the HOA. We held a few community meetings to discuss our options, but without the ability to remove the board or change the rules, we felt powerless. One of the most disheartening moments came when we found out that a few of our neighbors had decided to sell their homes and move away. They couldn't handle the stress and harassment anymore. It was heartbreaking to see our community being torn apart by the very organization that was supposed to protect it. Despite all this, we refused to give up. We kept documenting everything, hoping that someday we would find a way to fight back effectively. The situation had taken over our lives, but we were determined not to let the HOA win. And so, here we are, still fighting, still hoping for some kind of resolution. It's exhausting, frustrating, and sometimes feels hopeless, but we refuse to let the HOA bully us into submission. This is our home, and we're not going to give it up without a fight. The battle continues, and we'll keep standing up for ourselves and our community, no matter how difficult it gets. For 2 years, my neighbors left their cans at the end of the street all the time. If they had to take out the trash, they walked to the end of the driveway. I am too lazy for that, and would wheel my cab back to my garage every work. Then the trash service changed the pickup to only one side of the street, and I had to roll my trash can over to the neighbor's side on Mondays for pickup. All of a sudden, these neighbors who had never moved their trash can in 2 years became the most hardcore trash can Nazis in the world. Within minutes of pickup, they would be out wheeling their cans up their driveways, and when I forgot to get mine one night, I came out the next morning to it flung across my driveway. If you give people an excuse to be judgmental a-holes, they will change their whole life for a chance to judge others. This emphasis on a home being an income-generating property is partly to blame for the housing prices. Everyone wants to sell their home for a profit, and that's all they care about. For many HOAs, this has become their sole goal. They think having all homes in the HOA maintain ridiculous standards and rules makes property more valuable. Does a blue front door versus a white font door really affect property values? Highly doubt it. Or having a bird feeder in your backyard. Seeing these HOA horror stories makes me glad HOAs are not common where I live. We moved into our house just over 20 years ago. It had been the model home for the neighborhood, and so they converted the garage into the office for the builder. There is no garage. In our paperwork from when we bought the house, there is a clause stating we do not have to put our trash cans in the garage, as per our HOA covenants, because again, there is no garage. Every single time we get a new HOA board, we get a violation notice that we can't keep our trash cans on the side of the house. They must be in the garage or we'll have to pay a fine for every day they're out. It's gotten to the point that I just forward the same email I've been forwarding to them for 20 years that explains, once again, we don't have a garage. It's reached such ridiculousness I can't even be mad anymore. All I can do is laugh.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.